If there is one absolutely timeless lesson in military history, it's that terrain is destiny. You really can't understand the outcomes of military operations, the brilliant maneuvers, or honestly the tragic failures, without first completely mastering the ground on which they unfold. So today, we're doing exactly that. We are converting geography into operational reality. We're going to visualize the Sri Lankan battle space and examine how the physical environment, from its totally choked coastal passes right down to its dense jungle canopies, fundamentally dictated the military requirements, combat power application, and the ultimate strategic outcomes on the island. Let's get right into it.
Okay, here is how we're going to break this down. First, the strategic context and macrogeography. Second, Jaffna, the fragmented fortress. Third, the Vanni, the dense jungle. Fourth, the eastern province, coastal control. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with an operational synthesis and revision.
All right, Section 1, Strategic Context and Macrogeography. Let's start by looking at the island's geopolitical position and its broad topographical zones.
Now, every military campaign begins with a strategic environment. Sri Lanka sits precisely on key international sea lines of communication right in the Indian Ocean, with Colombo acting as a massive international port. But, geographically speaking, the most defining feature here is the incredibly narrow Palk Strait. The island is separated from the massive landmass of India by a mere 32 kilometers. That incredibly tight proximity instantly dictates the geopolitical reality and the maritime military requirements for absolutely any force operating here. The coastline extends into a 12 nautical mile maritime boundary, which basically means that securing the island intrinsically requires an immense level of naval and amphibious awareness.
Zooming in on the island's surface, the battle space is essentially split into 3 distinct elevation zones, and these act as your fundamental physical constraints on mobility. In the south-central heart, you've got the Central Highlands, high plateaus, steep escarpments, and peaks rising over 2,000 meters. Surrounding this are the plains, sitting largely between 30 and 200 meters. What a commander really needs to note here is the abrupt transition. In the southeast, the mountains rise from the plains almost like a massive wall. And finally, the coastal belt wraps the entire island. For an operational planner, this means an island-wide campaign just cannot be a simple sweeping advance. Your axes of advance are constantly going to be interrupted by drastic elevation changes, deep gorges, and dissected ridges that instantly funnel large formations into highly predictable routes.
Moving to Section 2, Jaffna, the fragmented fortress. We're heading to the northernmost operational theater now, into a landscape that completely transforms how a battle has to be fought.
So what's really fascinating here is how the terrain actively fights against the attacker. At first glance, Jaffna is flat. We're talking only 2 to 3 meters above sea level. But look closely at the water. The land is heavily punctuated by massive inland lagoons like Upperu, and it's literally scattered with over 1,000 small ponds. All this water severely fragments the land. It basically forces all movement into an incredibly intricate, dense network of roads that ultimately converge on Jaffna City. You absolutely cannot move freely cross-country here. The terrain channelizes your forces, creating a defender's absolute dream.
And that brings us to a dual geographic reality that totally defines Jaffna, because it's practically an island itself. The surrounding seas are constantly inviting amphibious operations and flanking maneuvers along its vulnerable coastal peripheries. Yet land access? That is restricted to a singular rigid gateway, the Elephant Pass. In military terms, this is the absolute choke point. It's of immense tactical importance simply because whoever controls Elephant Pass controls the only land bridge to the entire peninsula. It concentrates the decisive battles of the whole theater into one tiny geographic bottleneck.
Let's convert this geography into some combat power analysis. What are our tactical deductions? Well, first, the ground is extremely boggy. This completely sidelines mechanized armor, restricting your tanks strictly to the narrow roads. And because armor is limited, the heavy fighting falls straight to the infantry. But here's the catch. Jaffna is densely populated and heavily built up, making it absolutely ideal for urban defense, sniping, and ambushes. Now, when infantry gets bogged down in urban combat, standard doctrine often screams for heavy artillery and close air support. However, employing concentrated heavy fire here risks immense collateral damage to civilians, which severely, politically, restricts a commander's options. Add to this the fact that there are no rivers, only underground limestone aquifers for water, and you've got a logistical and tactical nightmare for any advancing force.
Section 3, Vanni, the dense jungle. Shifting our focus just south of Jaffna, the battle space alters entirely. Welcome to the Vanni,
Unlike the incredibly packed Jaffna Peninsula, the Vanni region is one of the most sparsely populated areas on the entire island. It's a vast, low, flat, rolling plain dominated by dry zone evergreen forests. From an operational perspective, this massive area acts as a heavily obscured transit zone. The north-south and east-west roads that cut through it become your absolute vital lines of operation, because the moment you step off the road, you are entering the deep jungle.
Now, the really crucial point here is understanding that not all jungles are the same, and this completely changes tactical movement. The Vanni contains both primary and secondary forests. In places like Mulativu, you have primary forests. Think big trees with a thick overhead canopy shutting out the sky, but with very little undergrowth. This means movement on the ground is surprisingly easy and line of sight is pretty long, but you are totally hidden from aerial reconnaissance. Conversely, the rest of the Vanni consists of secondary jungles. These are packed with dense, tangled undergrowth and incredibly thorny thickets. Here, cross-country movement is physically stopped. You simply cannot push a large force through it.
Naturally, these differences lead to severe operational consequences. The primary forests provide the ultimate cover and concealment, making areas like Madu and Mulativu perfect strongholds for hidden militant bases and massive logistical caches. On top of that, the thick canopy physically neutralizes the attacker's technological advantages. It severely limits the effectiveness of close air support and artillery. Because the secondary dense scrub prevents off-road movement, advancing troops are forced right back onto predictable roads and dirt tracks. This perfectly sets the stage for devastating IED networks and deadly ambushes. All the while, the extensive eastern and western coastlines are offering a constant lifeline for lateral infiltration and exfiltration.
Section 4. Eastern Province, Coastal Control. We're pivoting to the eastern side of the island now, a theater completely defined by its complex waterways and critical infrastructure.
The eastern province encompasses Trincomalee, Baticolo, and Amparai. When you're visualizing this battle space, you've got to note the terrain gradient. It transitions from low-lying coastal plains in the east to rising highlands as you push west. This fundamentally dictates your axis of advance. If a military force needs to move west, moving inland, they must travel along specific road axials that emanate from the coastal infrastructure, literally pushing uphill into restrictive terrain. And this brilliantly illustrates the strategic centerpiece of the entire region, Trincomalee. Listen, it isn't just a port. It is the fifth largest natural deepwater harbor in the entire world. In a theater where land routes are constantly threatened by jungle ambushes or chopped up by lagoons, Trincomalee is the absolute center of gravity for heavy sea and air movement. It's the essential logistical anchor that sustains massive military and supply operations across the whole province. Looking at the terrain matrix for the east, you can see the province is horizontally sliced by rivers, like the massive Mahaweli Genga, flowing west to east right into the sea. This deeply fragments the battle space, requiring commanders to rely heavily on bridging or amphibious operations just to move north to south. Meanwhile, the coastal mangrove ecosystems, they provide perfect, virtually impenetrable cover for militant caches and hideouts right on the water's edge. So, while north-south movement is easiest along the immediate coastal roads, attempting to push deeper inland means facing dense forests that conceal established, fortified bases.
Right, let's see how all of this builds into our final section, operational synthesis and revision. It's time to lock in our visual memory of these distinct battle spaces.
Here is your war room summary. These are the 10 critical terrain deductions that dictate success or failure in this environment. Number 1. The 32-kilometer Palk Strait absolutely drives the naval strategic context. 2. Elephant Pass is the singular choke point for Jaffna. 3. Jaffna's boggy ground completely sidelines mechanized armor. 4. Built-up urban areas limit heavy artillery due to the huge risk of collateral damage. 5. The primary canopy of the Vanni neutralizes close air support. 6. The Vanni's secondary scrub forces highly vulnerable, road-bound movement. 7. East-west rivers severely segment the eastern province. 8. Mangroves provide flawless coastal hideouts. 9. Trincomalee is the vital, irreplaceable hub for sea and air logistics. And 10. With so much coastline and lagoon coverage, all three regions are perpetually vulnerable to amphibious flanking.
Now, to properly analyze these operations, you need to anchor these terms in your mind. A choke point, like Elephant Pass, dictates all movement. Lines of operation are those vital roads slicing through the Vanni. Infiltration utilizes those coastal mangroves. Collateral damage restrains firepower in densely packed Jaffna. Amphibious operations actively exploit the island's geography. And close air support is heavily mitigated by primary forest canopies. You see, these aren't just textbook definitions. They're the hard operational realities generated entirely by the terrain.
I want to leave you with one final analytical question to really test your battlefield visualization. Based on everything we've just covered, how does the specific canopy and the dense, thorny undergrowth of the Vanni jungle dictate a commander's choice between deploying heavy mechanized units versus light mobile infantry forces? Think about the lines of sight, the predictability of movement, and the constant threat of ambushes. Take this cause and effect framework with you as you analyze literally any future military operation. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep visualizing the battle space and keep learning.